If there is a central concept which can be pointed to as the basis of the Marxist project, it is undoubtedly class. Despite this centrality, newcomers are unlikely to find much discussion of what class is in much of the discipline's popular introductory literature. This is much to the detriment of the communist tendency, providing at least one basis for the formation of reductive understandings of class within Marxism. There is a need for a more detailed conversation. Over the next few minutes, we intend to outline why, looking at why examples of classes often substitute for a definition of class in introductory approaches to Marxism, Marx's own analytical approach to class, an illustrative debate on approaches to class analysis, and why class is central to the Marxist project. We urge you to take this conversation forward yourselves, and we've included materials to aid with an initial group discussion on the subject in the video description. Welcome to Approaching Marxism. Though he left us many descriptions and analyses of particular classes, Marx left us no text explicitly summarising his view of class as a conceptual framework. The only place in which he appears to begin to do so, the last chapter of the third volume of Capital, runs to only 5 paragraphs before breaking off unfinished. Therefore, most introductory approaches find themselves working backwards in a sense. The argument echoes the brief outline given in the Communist Manifesto. Classes are divided into property-owning oppressor classes, gradations of middlemen, and oppressed labouring classes. This division gives rise to contradictions of interest. The struggle between classes, which results from these contradictions, is for Marx the determining struggle in history. Previous societies have had very diverse class structures, depending upon the development of their means of production. For example, the dominant classes under feudalism included the aristocracy and the peasantry, but also vassals, guildmasters, journeymen, apprentices, and even merchant capitalists. Capitalism has largely simplified this relationship into 2 great classes: the bourgeoisie, who own money and means of production, and the proletariat, who own only their ability to work and sell this for wages. A class emerges, therefore, as a broad social group which relates to production in a particular unified way. Whilst this explanation is not incorrect, it is simplistic and runs the risk of reductionism, substituting broad, abstract categories for the study of reality, if taken as comprehensive. Whilst we cannot pretend to reconstitute an intended conceptual definition from Marx's analysis of classes, his approach adds considerable complexity to this simplistic explanation. The first volume of Capital is particularly illustrative. The analytic deployed can be broken down into 2 distinct approaches for the sake of explanation, but it is always combined in Marx's own use. The first approach is explained clearly in chapter 23, where Marx argues that all sustained relations of production necessarily reproduce themselves. This is the result of production viewed as a total, connected process. Aside from the summary of this total process under capitalism in this chapter, Marx breaks down individual processes which contribute to the formation of the industrial proletariat throughout the volume, pointing toward the way in which market logic divides humanity into classes despite its formal equality. The grouping together of masses of workers as a necessary step for the formation of both industrial capitalist and worker, or the violent appropriation of workers through enclosures and colonial conquest as a handful of examples. The variety of these processes illustrates the complexity by which class is produced through productive relations. Practically, this allows us to distinguish between a modern industrial proletariat and workers who subsisted by waged labour in previous periods of history, a common phenomenon discussed in Jaros Benagi's 2006 essay, Workers Before Capitalism. This is complemented by the other approach deployed across the volume by Marx, the analysis of variance within classes, their internal structure. Marx addresses stratification of the proletariat in particular detail, with, for example, repeated discussion of a hierarchy of wages, the distinction between rural and urban proletarians, or different types of unemployed worker. A particularly striking example emerges in his discussion of the relationship between male workers and their families. In chapter 15, Marx describes male workers as slave dealers as they sell the labour power of their wives and children on the market through the legal framework of the patriarchal family. He further expands upon this observation in his discussion of the tramping gang in chapter 25. In this example, a male worker leads a group of others, most commonly children, and undertakes the sale of their labour power for them. Crucially, in both instances, Marx is clear that both the worker selling their family or gang and those that they are selling remain a part of the proletariat, as neither possess capital. Labour power is sold to a capitalist, not to a family's patriarch or to a gang leader. This allows for complex and even directly exploitative relationships within the same class, and shows the manner in which distinct forms of oppression, here patriarchy, enter into the composition of class relations. Combined, the two approaches used by Marx illustrate that his concern is not simply to illustrate the shared interests or relations which define classes in aggregate, but also in the concrete analysis of how classes are produced and the varied results of this process. The structuralist Marxist Eric Olin Wright's 1980 article, Varieties of Marxist Conceptions of Class Structure, provides a useful illustration of the variety of reductive interpretations of Marx's approach to class. As an intervention into debates over the so-called professional and managerial class, or PMC, that is, workers that play a perceived particular role in the reproduction of capitalist relations, like managers or teachers. Wright identifies several distinct approaches toward these professions. For our present purpose, we need only discuss a handful. One of the most vulgar arguments covered in this piece is still repeated today, in even cruder forms. In this view, only workers which directly contribute toward value production can be considered proletarian, meaning that managers, bureaucrats, and even shop clerks cannot form a part of the working class. Instead, the argument goes, workers which do not produce value exploit those who do produce value, as they subsist on the product of this latter group's labour. This is an evidently absurd position, as both productive and unproductive worker sell their labour power to a capitalist. It treats class exclusively in terms of what is produced by labour, rather than the product of how one relates to production as a whole. Another position offers an equally reductive perspective in the opposite direction. In this example, an excessively strict application of Marx's understanding of how the proletariat relates to capitalist production is deployed to argue that even CEOs are a part of the proletariat, as they do not strictly own a company in a legal sense, and they are paid in wages. The form of the relation is placed before any of its content. Finally, Wright himself argues that the PMC occupy a contradictory class location between bourgeois and proletariat, as they are paid in wages, but also hold some power over the organisation of production due to the nature of their roles. Whilst it is true that these positions cause conflict with other workers, the position that these workers exercise real control over production is absurd. They exercise control over labour for the capitalist, on pain of severance. It is also incongruous with Marx's direct writing on middle managers, which he treats as part of the proletariat in a posthumously published appendix to Volume 1 of Capital. If each of these examples shows a specific form of reductionism, the very premise of the PMC debate illustrates another, that professions are unified economic phenomena. That this is not the case is straightforward to illustrate. Manager can refer to either CEOs or middle managers. Doctors can own their own surgeries as capitalists or work for others as proletarians, and so on. As should be plain, there are many paths to a reductionist understanding of class. In recent years, the centrality of class within Marxism has come under considerable criticism as a form of quote-unquote class reductionism. We do not pretend to be able to answer these criticisms here, and we shall return to this subject in the future. Rather, we wish to point toward an understanding of why class is central to Marxism as the basis for this future discussion. Class, for Marx and for a serious Marxism, is not intended to posit an uncomplicated unity, relegating questions of race, gender, or disability to a future socialism, as it is commonly mobilised. Its centrality is based upon Marx's view of historical development and the material basis of politics. As discussed in the last 2 episodes of this series, Marx views the mode of production as the fundamental basis of society and historical development, with politics and law, that is, the superstructure of society, determined by this productive base. The class which dominates over production dominates this superstructure, organising society in its interests. It is only a combined challenge in both economic and political struggle that a new mode of production may be instituted through revolution. Only classes are capable of struggle with this character and scope. This is why Marxism situates class as central to its analytical approach. It does not imply that differences among the proletariat can be ignored, as the detail of Marx's structural approach indicates. On the contrary, it necessitates that these questions form an active part of a Marxist politic if a proletarian class unity is to be achieved. We hope that this discussion has provided a basis to begin addressing these questions and a route into a more detailed discussion of class. Now, it's over to you.